I would like to welcome Dr. Reed Geisler. We are very, very fortunate to have him with us. He was the moderator for the Discord server for anesthesiology applications this last application cycle. Welcome, Reed. Can you please introduce yourself briefly for?
Hi, so I went to Ohio State for medical school, graduated in the year 2022. I'm currently a surgery intern at Mount Sinai, and I'm heading to Yale for a CA1 spot this July.
I feel fortunate to happen
Mhm.
to know the person who ran the Discord, the infamous Discord server. How did you find yourself in this position to moderate it?
Sure. So it started around March of 2021. So that's around when I joined the cycle actually for the first cycle that I was applying to in anesthesiology. It had already been made by someone at that point. I'd started to be quite active because I had finished out my third year and I had a bit more time to spare. And over the course of the next few months, I was someone that was fairly active. I tried to help kind of dissipate certain arguments that had happened or try to assuage certain people's concerns over time. And the person that had created that server found that they were very, very occupied for a while. So they added me on as the moderator to help them for that cycle. When unfortunately I didn't match with the last cycle because I'd been so active now as one of the moderators for that previous cycle, I was one of two people that agreed to create the Discord for this upcoming year. So that's how I found myself in this position where now I was one of two moderators for this cycle as well as for the previous cycle for Discord.
Wow. So you
Mhm.
mentioned that you were chosen because you were kind of intervening during some arguments that were going on,
Mhm.
and you had to assuage certain concerns.
Yeah.
What were some of the challenges that you found running the server?
Well, I find so in the server, I actually just double checked how many people there are on the server this morning just to prepare for this interview. And there are a current total of 4,475 accounts. So that includes current applicants, includes certain residents, it includes people applying into next year. And in any large group of people, you'll find that, the vast majority of them will be completely nice, normal, decent people, but there'll always be that maybe 5% or so are people that are a bit more troublemakers. So I feel that while the vast majority of interactions were, very collegial, it was very productive in terms of having, information available for applicants. That's ultimately what the point of the Discord was. There would occasionally throughout the year be arguments about, you know, how much should step scores matter? How much should other holistic matters factor? How much should certain extracurriculars or aways matter for programs? How much should signals matter? And just kind of the sort of thing where when applicants argue among themselves about details like that, everyone has their own individual biases. Programs might have their own individual preferences about how much they value or weight those certain factors. And just trying to have a reasonable, more detached perspective of just trying to do the best you can. In the end, the best program out there is the one you match to. Just trying to be as supportive and reasonable to people as possible in terms of we're all going through this stressful process together, and let's just try to be supportive to each other.
So you mentioned that there were arguments that
Mhm.
you had to intervene in about things like the importance of signals or the importance of step scores. That's interesting that that would lead those kinds of questions will lead to so much acrimony. I'm guessing it just is a reflection of how stressed out all of the applicants were. Can you give an anecdote? Obviously, not naming names. We don't want to dox anyone here.
Mhm.
About how one of these seemingly, benign or objective topics could lead to the kind of argumentation that would need someone to moderate or intervene.
Sure. One particular circumstance was someone that had been targeted. I don't want to give their exact name or their exact situation, of course, to allude to that specific circumstance. But what we found was the person that targeted him, like they had posted a picture of him, so it was definitely known that they did, in fact, know who this other person was. Um, they knew not because of any kind of security leak within Discord. They knew because that other person had posted a picture of their own interview setup, so they had known okay, they happened to see them on an interview day or an open house because they knew what their background looked like, so they knew who they were. Um, from that point, that itself wasn't a concern, but it was when they kept alluding to that. I'd have to remove specific comments that stated, basically who that person was. I gave several reminders to that person that, I was trying to respect their privacy, make sure people are anonymous if they choose to be. And unfortunately, in that particular individual, I did have to uh, remove eventually because they kept, unfortunately, making this person feel very uncomfortable. As far as a broader topic that required more, that was more a matter of just generally bringing about acrimony, would be something like, as the interview cycle has stayed virtual, arguably something that's been more important for a lot of programs when reviewing applicants is like, who do they actually know, which can be, their home students or their away students. And that itself brings up some acrimony in terms of like, there are some students who might go on, 5 different aways, or there might be a student who can only go to one away or not even be able to afford an away. And so that's why some people have some concerns about that, where I feel like there's a certain line of thinking a lot of people have, and that's the virtual process has made things more inexpensive for applicants. But in reality, it just means that it's shifted the weighting of importance to aways, which can be very much expensive to get, housing in another place for a month.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So much of the current changes have to do
Mhm.
with the notion of equity and fairness. And you bringing up the arguments about the value of aways and the cost
Mhm.
of aways, I think shows some of the unintended consequences. We think that we're really leveling the playing field, but any population who's fighting for a limited resource is going to find some other ways to change that level playing field. And yes, it does cost a lot to do aways, and I think it would be foolhardy to think that those aren't providing an obvious advantage. I know from my experience as a program director, someone who spends a month with you tells you so much more about themselves than you can get over an interview, virtual or in person. Why do you think so many applicants utilize a resource like the Discord server? It's changed in the
Mhm.
past. You had SDN, you had the Google spreadsheet. Now it seems to have moved primarily to Discord. Why do you think Discord's so popular?
So I think that it's a matter of a few different reasons. Those were all like very useful resources, the spreadsheet and SDN. And I think that the Discord is kind of similar to the student doctor network in that you have this kind of pseudo anonymous kind of persona, that there's a persistent account. If like one person is, commenting a whole bunch of things, and you can know whether or not to trust them partially based on that, because you know that they have a track record of, being very active in the Discord, versus something with the spreadsheet where it's very, very active. It's extraordinarily good in terms of organization, but you don't know who's editing which cells. It is completely anonymous. And actually, later in the cycle, there was some vandalism on that spreadsheet that repeatedly kept happening. And I think that that was part of the reason why people started moving from primarily the spreadsheet to primarily the Discord. I'd say the other thing that's a bit more of a positive is that, as everything has gone or was virtual, at least for the last couple of years, especially as a result of COVID, people do want to, have some aspect of community and some aspect of, getting to know the other people that they're going to potentially be, interns and residents with. And how that's come across is actually at both the last couple of ASA meetings, there have been large groups of people that were like met each other through the Discord that, did some events in the local city, both in San Diego a couple of years ago and in New Orleans, like just this last ASA meeting. There's a lot of like community people private message each other and get to know each other afterwards. I know I'm still in contact with quite a few people I met from even that first cycle when I was moderating. A lot of interactions are collegial. There's other parts of the Discord that aren't even really dedicated more towards professionalism and things, but more towards just, other hobbies or books or other interests people have, doesn't they just want to talk about just for fun. And I think that that community aspect is something that Discord in itself particularly shines.
There are going to be some anesthesia
Mhm.
educators, program directors, or people who are a bit
Mhm.
older who might actually know what Discord is. So you mentioned Discord was initially started as a platform for people to talk about video games. Can you just briefly describe what makes Discord different from other online applications that people might be
Sure.
familiar with?
Of course. So to compare it again, something like Student Doctor Network, that is itself an internet forum. So that's like board messages where there'll be like a specific thread with a subject line, and then people individually posting under that topic sequentially after each other. Discord is kind of like that, where you'll have a particular header that'll be dedicated to a certain subject. Like there's one for application discussion, or there's one for talking about preparing for ASA. And it's not quite as, I'd say, formal looking as like a website or a thread. It's more like kind of like a text chain within those certain different headers. About midway through the cycle, people would occasionally say like, of your signals, please fill out this poll. Like of those five, from 0 to 5, how many of them have resulted in an interview for you? So applicants could get a sense, oh, okay, so on average, about 3 out of 5 or so, or 4 out of 5 of the people that the programs that people signal did end up giving them. So the difference between like something like the Google spreadsheet and the Discord is that the Google spreadsheet is completely and totally anonymous, so that you don't know who exactly is writing what. There is a single person who is able to control permissions on this sheet, but otherwise it can be very easily messed with, unfortunately, and it just takes one person out of a group of several thousand people to really destroy a lot of work that a lot of people have put into in the spreadsheet. Whereas with the Discord, control over permissions, or what exactly people can and cannot post to, as well as the ability to ban an internet troll, or someone that's acting very inappropriately towards someone else. So I'll say something like that is much easier to facilitate.
That's great. So it sounds like
Mhm.
it has some powerful tools providing information for you guys that you probably wish we as program directors, um, or the ACGME would be able to give you about what's happening in real time. I think that some of the statistics you guys are getting in real time will probably be reflected
Mhm.
later on, as we collect data after this interview cycle utilizing signals. So as you were moderating, what were some of the major themes that came up this year? Like, what did applicants seem most interested to be discussing about?
I I think it very much changed depending on the point in the cycle that we were in. For example, I'm looking now at the next year's applicant Discord that was just started pretty much right around March. And right now, a lot of them are concerned about preparing for a ways. Other than that, a lot of times people will ask questions that will try and help them to target towards their own applications. For example, a lot of these people preparing to apply now are like, hey, which programs did people experience seem to not have a very heavy emphasis on stats, or which programs did? Over the course of the interview cycle itself, people would also ask, hey, does anyone know if there are interview spots left at program X? Or hey, is there anyone that I could private message about um, how the interview day was set up at program Y, or what were people's interview impressions? Um, there's also early on in the cycle, I remember discussion about knowing what resources are available for preparing to apply. For example, not everyone knows that the ASA medical student component has a table and a database that says, okay, these are the open houses that programs are having throughout the year. I'd say having a way of centrally referring to important dates and important resources like that was a pretty major point of the Discord.
It's great. It seems like the Discord server is filling a lot of gaps that we should be filling as a profession or as residency program directors, or maybe they're out there. The ASA is doing a lot of great work. We at SCA try to do a lot of
Mhm.
great work, but it seems like it's filling the gaps in terms of the knowledge people don't have. So you mentioned that a lot of the discussions or themes were time specific,
Mhm.
as in where you were in the application cycle. But how about using the factor of time, maybe this year, given what's unique about anesthesiology applications or challenges in applying to anesthesiology this year as compared to past years? What were some of the themes that you
Uh,
think dominated?
I think the big one was, how have people's experience been with the supplemental application and with signals? For example, um, did someone regret, or were they happy with the geographic regions they signaled? Did they have much of an impact in terms of what programs they actually sent a signal to, especially given we only had 5 this past year?
What you
Yes.
say is really
Mhm.
interesting, and this might be a chance for me, for us
Mhm.
as programmers to get some feedback. How did people feel about the signals? Or did they regret how they used them? Geographic? What were some major discussions you can recall that would give us feedback about some of the changes and how
Sure.
it impacted applicants?
Yeah, I'd say like anything else, it varies a lot in terms of directly, what people thought. It's hard to summarize exactly, the thoughts of thousands of applicants. But in terms of the number of signals, I think it was a pretty common conception that 5 was definitely on the low end, that people do wish that they could have signaled more places. Especially there were also, it's common experience people have across the interview cycle that, the places they ranked at the end didn't necessarily align with the places that they had signaled at the beginning. There are a lot of programs that people learn more about or priorities shift over the course of the application cycle. But I'd say in general, most people were happy with the programs they had at least chosen to signal initially. As far as geographic signaling was concerned, that I think the primary complaint was in terms of how the borders were done. It was a little bit interesting in terms of, I remember there was like one giant region for like the Mountain West, but the number of programs that were distributed in each region was very variable. I remember the Northeast, I think, was split into two separate regions with someone that was on the mid-Atlantic, and it was a bit interesting if someone was on one of those border states, how they would regionally signal, especially given that it could be all three of their regions would be, they happen to be right at the border between all three regions. So I personally put the preference that I have no geographic preference. I would be happy to go anywhere for as long as I get good training. And I found that my interviews where I was offered, about half of them were either where I was from originally in Connecticut, where I grew up, or where I went to medical school in Ohio. And the other half were kind of spread around the country with a couple in California, one in Texas, a couple in Florida.
Well, I think we've talked a lot as program directors. The
Mhm.
SAAAPM has given some discussion, and a lot of the experiences you talk about, I think, were reflected on, and we should see some improvements next year.
Mhm.
Uh, so moderating something that gives all these applicants the chance to talk and actually express their anxiety, you must have had some really wild experiences. So, are there any really interesting or like wild stories, of course, protecting people's identities that you can talk about based on your moderation?
I think it was pretty interesting. So I was someone that was mostly anonymous, but it was the sort of deal where, okay, if someone really tried to, they could certainly figure out who I was based on things I'd written about programs, based on what I was saying this year. So like this current intern year, for example, a couple of the current anesthesiology interns at the institution where I am were like, hey, wait a minute, you're this guy, right? Like you were the person that moderated our like Discord cycle last year, right? So I was recognized a few times during my actual intern year. That was a bit funny. Also at ASA, a couple people recognized me, which was also kind of an interesting experience.
So you've matched. Congratulations! You didn't
Thank
just
you.
match; you matched phenomenally. So after that experience, you've had all these conversations on Discord. You've moderated all these conversations. What are some of the major misconceptions that you think applicants have throughout the cycle that you can now identify after having gone through it?
I think it depends at what point the applicant is in their own sort of journey. I'd say there are a lot of people that are like M2s and M3s that think, oh, prestige matters above everything, where it doesn't, especially not in anesthesiology. I'd say it's kind of like it's more the best program for someone, at least in my own opinion, is just where they'll be happy and where they're confident they'll get strong training. And thankfully, you know, all supervisory societies seem to be doing well in terms of making sure that the programs that are accredited for anesthesiology, everyone's hitting their numbers, everyone's getting their reps in, everyone's producing, great anesthesiologists. So the misconceptions applicants have early on is, how much they should weight something like doximity rankings or something to that effect, where it's the sort of thing where it really will not make you happier in the end if you go to like the number one program versus the number 100. Well, the matter more is, are your co-interns and co-residents people that you'll actually be happy with? Is this an area that you think that you're going to be happy? In general, I'd say the where a lot of people shift from the start of the application cycle towards the end of the application cycle is how much they actually value the prestige of the programs that they're applying to. Where does someone think that they will actually be happy? Where does someone think that they will be successful?
We're
Mhm.
talking about values, and that's
Yeah,
interesting. It's very subjective.
yeah.
Did you see any misconceptions along what we call like more like objective parameters,
Sure.
misconceptions about process, misconceptions about what can I do or not that increases my odds, importance of
Oh,
aspects of their
okay.
application? Were there things that people came in with where you can say not value based, but factually based? This seems to be a major misconception.
I think common misconceptions. I've been told, oh, med school grades don't really matter. Just focus on step scores. maybe do some research, etc. Where I was actually told, when I was reapplying that, the fact that I was in sort of a lower quartile in my MSPE was something that programs did take issue with. So it is something that unfortunately does matter to quite a few programs. Step scores, yeah, I mean, now that step one is pass fail and everything's kind of put onto step two, it's questionable how much programs will or won't value that. But in general, it seems like now that pressure is just laid straight on to step two. It varies a lot, also in terms of how much a ways mattered for certain
We're
programs.
talking about,
Mhm.
you know, maybe people had misconceptions about what programs were valuing. And you're
Oh
right,
yeah.
with the change to pass fail, I think it's probably also those misconceptions could be related to the fact that things are shifting with
Mhm.
with step one becoming pass fail and maybe an increased emphasis on clinical rotation grades. So we're talking about program values, but maybe we have misconceptions about applicant values. So
Yeah.
through moderating the server, what do you feel are some of the big values? And there's gonna be some heterogeneity, but some of the main values expressed by the applicants with whom you interacted. When I say values, I mean
Mhm.
like the things they're placing emphasis on when they're looking for programs.
I think that when it comes down to especially ranking the programs that someone's interviewed with, it will come down to figuring out from the residents themselves, like, is this a place where if you had to go through residency again, would you go through it here again? Or would you try to go somewhere else? Would you value something differently? Would you want to go to a different region? Would you want to go to someplace that's stronger in certain aspects? And I think that something that programs do have access to, but not many program directors share at interview are kind of like those resident survey numbers, where it's kind of like saying, okay, how satisfied are your residents with your program? And I think that seeing those kind of numbers at certain programs is a way that really is a way that program directors can provide some sort of reassurance without just saying, oh, the best thing about our program is the people. It's a way of actually showing data that can kind of back up that claim. You can say how much your residents actually do like their training, how much they are satisfied with their own training. Maybe identify the areas that they're currently working on. Like
Saying
that.
that
Yeah.
the applicants, some of they value
Mhm.
getting real information about resident satisfaction. I
Yeah.
guess let me dial it back. We talk about generational values.
Sure.
Are there any things that you noticed, like in general, and of course there's heterogeneity, like major things that people were looking for? I'll throw out some examples, like maybe work-life balance is very important for me, or the opportunity to achieve moonlighting money.
Yes, I would say moonlighting is something that was very commonly brought up in the Discord. Average hours was something that was brought up periodically, but there was always a discussion of, especially from current residents actually that are in the Discord, saying, some people just have different practices in terms of how they log hours. In general, you'll all be expected to work in your anesthesia years in most programs somewhere around 60 hours a week. However, if there are major deviations from program from that number, then that would be something like worth, investigating potentially. I'd say another thing could be a concern of like our residents relieving CRNAs or our CRNAs relieving residents kind of discussion, which is always something that's brought up about trying to figure out the differences in cultures in certain departments and programs. Um, but yeah, I'd say work-life balance is something that I think was brought up multiple times in the Discord.
So I guess I would go
Mhm.
one more step. Your experience moderating, what do the kids want? What do you think in general applicants are saying? These are big values. These are the things we want. And of course, people are all different. But if you could give a couple or three main values that applicants that you encountered were looking for in general.
I would say strong training, work-life balance are the people that are, families in the program, for example, moonlighting. Those three I think would be probably among the most common, different caveats.
Well, I appreciate your time and you've been very generous. I know you're currently a surgery intern, so I also appreciate your team getting you some time off. The last question. So after this experience, do you have any advice for programs or directors, based on interactions you've had with medical students applying? Like, how can we better meet their needs? What are we missing in terms of information we're providing or recognition of what they are looking for and need from us?
I'd say honestly, people would probably be happier with people that are, you know, more people that are either current residents or otherwise involved with programs engaging with them either on the Discord or having more open houses or that kind of resources where people are able to, find out more specific information about their own programs or have someone that they're available to private message or direct message through a platform like Discord to find out a bit more information. And that's where, something like Discord kind of shines. I'd say more in general, in terms of applications and application cycles. I was thinking sometimes this cycle about the movie Moneyball, which is about, kind of the Oakland A's, I think like 2002 season where it was about how the Oakland A's, who is very like under resourced team, managed to get, I think it was something like 20 games in a row they won and how they completely organized their strategy. And it was making me think about the application cycle in terms of okay, the recommendation has always been, get the highest step one score you can, get the highest step two score you can, and programs will see and value that. And it makes me wonder, if programs do diversify their own kind of interests and sort of diversify what they themselves look for, there are a lot of wonderful diamonds in the rough there. I can think of course, I'm selfish thinking of my own experience where my own weaknesses were in terms of like step score, my med school grades, but I was very strong in other respects. And I can think of other interns, even this year, I know that were reapplying, some of whom who successfully reapplied and some of whom unfortunately did not in terms of, you know, some people that are extraordinarily hard workers, extraordinarily kind people that unfortunately don't get the outcome that we all hope for in the end. And it's the sort of thing that, we all wish that we could be kind of flies in the wall and know exactly what goes on in those sort of backroom discussions. What do programs do truly matter versus what might be a misconception or based on general advice that people get about programs when there could be much more specific information that programs might want to reveal or it seems like might prefer to be more guarded about in terms of what they value. Um, because the reality is that there are a lot of individual programs and individual applicants out there that all have their own strengths that aren't as standard as a number on a sheet, whether that is through step scores, whether it is through med school grades, whether it is through this other tertiary kind of grading platform some programs are using called Altus. I mean, it's the sort of thing where we're all kind of wired for objective information in some way. And unfortunately, a lot of times what people are looking for and what seems to matter in the end, at least based on my own experience in intern year, are things that really can't be quantified. And
So
that's the
what
sort
I'm
of thing
hearing,
where, yeah.
what I'm hearing from you is
Mhm.
applicants would like to see more consistent engagement,
Yes.
maybe even through the platforms,
Yeah.
like to see us utilizing a more holistic review. And finally, maybe you'd like some insight into the process that we utilize so you know what kind of, for lack of a better term, game you're playing. I think that's actually great feedback that we can
Mhm.
use as program directors, and a lot of program directors will be watching this interview. So Reed, thank you. I really appreciate your time. Most importantly, congratulations
Mhm.
on
Thank
your
you.
outstanding match with one of the
Mhm.
best program directors in the country, Dr. Bob Geiser. I really appreciate your time and all the best to you. Great success.